Gina, tell us about these new recommendations for children in the U.S. with obesity.
These are recommendations by an influential group, the American Academy of Pediatrics. They are a departure from what people have been doing in the past. They are telling pediatricians in very definitive language to do something very bold. When they have a child who has obesity, they say, you have to be aggressive. You have to take action now. And it is a response to a new understanding of what obesity is and what to do about it.
And just remind us of how widespread a problem this is and how many people are likely to be impacted by these bold new guidelines.
It's a huge number. 14.4 million children and adolescents, 1 in 5. A lot of children.
20% of American children.
That is right.
And what's the nature of the recommendations from this group?
They're very sweeping. They involve examining a child as young as 2 and saying, does this child have obesity? If so, they advise intensive lifestyle counseling and treatment. And for children who are 12 years old or older and they have obesity, they say it is appropriate and recommended to prescribe a drug that will help them lose weight. And for children 13 and older with severe obesity, they might want to consider bariatric surgery, weight loss surgery.
Wow. Those are pretty aggressive forms of intervention for young people.
What's up, mi gente? So my clients sent me that podcast. Number one, I love the awareness that my clients start to have once we start to work together about the healthcare system, about things that just don't make sense. They start to question things. They start to see through what should be obvious that they're talking about, right? And this podcast was so interesting. It's talking about childhood obesity. And they're talking about that it's a problem and it gets worse as people go into adulthood. And in functional medicine, we know that. I'm not a functional medicine doctor. I'm not a medical professional. I am a certified integrative nutrition health coach, right? But if you work with health coaches are a part of their practice because it is imperative to create lifestyle changes, to have somebody checking in on you, and not in like a negative way, just to see how you're doing, just to see how you're adapting, just to see the challenges that you're having and if you can level up. Anyway, back to this podcast. I know it's a super sensitive topic, right? And the podcast touches upon obesity becoming an issue like in the 1970s and 1980s. And it just so happens that that's also when the food industry started making very ultra processed foods, started making a lot of things that were very accessible, like frozen dinners. A lot of fast food was around and all of that was encouraged, right? They also talk about like body positivity and being healthy at every size, which is true. And they talk about being genetically predisposed to be in a bigger body, which is true. You can be 100% healthy. It doesn't matter what your size is, okay? But what they're specifically referring to is when children are obese and it leads to disease, okay? So they're not really genetically predisposed. They are just gaining weight, which is causing them to have things like diabetes, high blood pressure, all of that. And then they're saying how when they go into adulthood, it gets worse. Well, yes, it gets worse because no one's teaching them how to do anything different. So as you get older, what do you think is going to happen? Like nobody's teaching them, or their families for that matter, because children don't feed themselves. Children do not feed themselves, okay? We, the adults, make decisions about what to feed our children 90% of the time. So if we don't know any better, then the kids obviously. And yes, there are a lot of factors that come into play here. I feel like especially I feel like when you immigrate to the US, they're talking about the US population, right? Like, for example, if you're in DR or if you're in your home country, the chucherias and the junk food that you eat is still real food. Like, it's freaking chicharrones and like pastries and dulces made out of real food and things like that. It's not ultra processed foods, foods that are genetically modified most of the time, the way it happens here. Now, I'm not judging anybody or anything. I'm just talking about things that I observe and things that I see. For example, when I go to drop off my kids at school, there are so many children having a donut for breakfast. There are so many children drinking Sunny Delight and fruit punch and having chips and pound cake, muffins. And I'm not saying that we can't have these things. I'm saying that just because they're kids doesn't mean that it's not affecting them. And I know that I hear older generations say that a lot. Oh, they're kids, like, let them have a good time. I've heard that from my own mom, but I try to explain to them that although they're not going to get diabetes tomorrow because their body is still sharp, it will fatigue out. Your systems will start to slow down. It's like when you're driving on the highway or the freeway or whatever you call it, the parkway, and you're still going, but the traffic starts to slow down and slow down and slow down, and then it comes to a stop. It takes a while to get there. And it's the same thing with diabetes. However, it's coming at a younger and younger and younger age because what people are eating now is not even real food anymore for the most part. It's really ultra processed, fast. It really starts to add up. Now let's talk about genetics for a little bit, right? And being hereditary. If your grandparents started eating this way, if your parents started eating this way, you're eating this way, what do you think is going to go in your kids' genes? Okay? How strong is their foundation to not, go like accelerate their speed of being predisposed to these kinds of diseases? Okay? So, yeah, we can make generational health changes. We can start with us so that it has less effect later on. Now, the real wild part about this podcast is that they're talking about interventions as young as 2 years old, as young as 12 years old, giving them diet pills, and as young as 13 years old, getting weight loss surgery. Okay? Weight loss surgery for children. Now, why in the effing world does nobody say, let's do this massive campaign like they do for milk and they do for COVID and they do for all of these other things, and massively educate the population on nutrition? Why don't they start to regulate these food companies that literally are putting poison on our shelves? I know one reason why, because they're saying how expensive this medicine is. $1,000 a month, $1,000 a month for this medication. So of course they're gonna lean into that. And surgery, y'all, we have to take care of our health.